Well, there we go. A webinar began with an amusing accompaniment for a cuckoo clock. That's the first, I'm sure, for most of you. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. My name's Dan here. I'm Communications Director at eShot. We are a marketing automation software specialist, and I'm joined today by a very good friend of mine, Alex Hilditch from MarketScan. And Alex and I are here to hopefully answer your questions about B2B email marketing today, and hopefully impart lots of good advice and indeed some insights on you. Alex, can you hear me nice and clearly?
I can hear you. Thank you very much for the intro. Hi everyone, as Dan says, it's Alex from MarketScan, and hopefully between Dan and myself we'll be able to answer all your questions today. Firstly, we've had a number of questions around subject lines and deliverability. So Dan's got some slides to sort of cover those all off in one hit. And hopefully, if there's any further questions that come off the back of that, then we can answer those through the chat as well. So I'll pass you back to Dan, and we'll go through some quick slides on subject lines and deliverability.
Yeah, fab. Thanks, Alex. This is going to be all killer and no filler this afternoon. What we thought we'd do, because we have quite a few questions to cover today, we've batched some of them together, as Alex said, on a couple of those particular topics. So I just want to share with you some best practice in those particular areas, and indeed, I've got some supporting slide materials which will help to convey those points. After that, we're going to go through each of the other questions one by one. You'll get a chance to have a chat with us as well. And indeed, if you have any other burning questions that crop up as we go through, then please ask away. There's the question and answer function built into Zoom. You should be able to submit your questions and we will cover them off as we go. And if you are feeling brave, we're very happy to unmute you as well, so you can have a chat with us about things as well. What I'm going to do at this point is I am going to share my desktop as well. So hopefully you should be able to see slides now as well. Alex, is that coming through?
All coming through.
Fab. So as I say, we had a few questions about what to do with subject lines, what's best practice and what have you. This is one of the areas where actually there's quite a lot of commonality between both B2B and B2C email marketing. So what I'm going to show you today probably applies to both disciplines, but we did say the focus of this one will be on business to business. And basically I have 5 tips for you to make sure your subject lines get the result that you want. The first of is the purpose of the subject line is to sell the email. What I find is a lot of people spend a lot more time on the design of their email than on the creative to do with their subject line. And it's so important because when we talk about open rates, you know, yes, if you've got a 20%, 30%, 40% open rate, you're doing very well. But that does still mean the majority of people aren't even opening your email. And the reason that most people won't open your email is because they don't find anything of interest in the subject line. So it's important that we sell the email. It's important that we use the subject line as a way of getting people to open the email. And when we do get people to open the email, there's some very important principles that we need to adhere to if we want that subject line to be a success. The first one is to be succinct. Whenever I do workshops, you know, live workshops, which unfortunately we've had to put on hold at the moment, what I ask people to do is visualize their subject line on the front page of the Sun. You have 2 seconds and less than 40 characters to make an impression. And actually what you'll find is that the people who create the Sun headlines are the past masters at this. They capture people's interest and attention in just a couple of seconds. And you've got to do the same. Okay. Now, when we talk about subject lines, it is important to remember that there is a backup to the subject line as well. We have the preview text as well as the subject line itself. And those 2 things have to be used hand in hand, a little bit like we have, you know, in the case of a headline and a subheadline on a newspaper. So think about those 2 spaces. They are so important because this is what will decide whether people open your email or not. And you haven't got a lot of space to play with. So when I say be succinct, I mean basically keep the amount of copy that you have to a bare minimum. Okay, on iPhones you have just 41 characters, and that does include spaces. to get your subject line across before the email application will start to truncate it. In other words, cut off the words at the end. With the preview text, you've got a little bit more space, but when you are copywriting your subject lines, this is quite a useful little slide which we'll send out afterwards as the little cheat sheet for what you're dealing with. Certainly in business to business, iPhones and the Gmail client, you know, there's just because it's business to business doesn't mean people aren't using their mobiles to read email. The other usual suspect you will have is Outlook, and indeed we've seen huge growth in recent weeks of people using Outlook Online, so the Outlook web access version of Microsoft Outlook, you know, by virtue of them obviously having to work from home, perhaps not having their computers as they would have in their offices, and they're therefore accessing Outlook through a web browser. So it's worth bearing in mind that, you know, mail clients do restrict the amount of space you have to play as far as subject lines are concerned. Now, what I also said with that is we've got to be persuasive. Okay, so we have to persuade people to open our emails, and there are some psychological principles to that, which these are actually taken from a book called Influence by a chap called Robert Cialdini, and they are psychological principles. Their application goes much wider than subject lines, but I find that they consistently act as a good framework within which to undertake subject line creativity. And basically, each of these psychological principles can be used to encourage more people to open your emails. First one, scarcity. If your email is offering something which people feel might not be available to them for very long, or indeed there's a limited amount of, they will be more inclined to open them. Now, when we look at that in things like retailers, you'll see examples of that all the time where they have money off offers, time limited offers, etc., etc. And you find that hard baked into a lot of business to consumer marketing practices now. There's no reason why it shouldn't apply to business as well. You just have to perhaps think about the nuances of how that can be affected. You know, if you are offering free consultations at the moment, you know, is there a limit to the number that you can handle? If you are discounting things, is there a deadline on that? If you are running things like these webinars and what have you, is there a limit to the number of people that can come on it? I don't want to have to pay for the super enterprise version of Zoom. Therefore, we are limiting our audience today to quality over quantity. And thank you very much for joining us. But you know, from the principle of what you're writing in the subject line, think about ways in which someone's going to look at that subject line and think, oh, this is something I need to act upon now. You'll see that in various different manifestations in consumer email marketing, but what I would say is think about the equivalent in business to business. What have you got that is limited in terms of what people could consume? You know, be that the product itself, the service that you're selling, or indeed the content that you're promoting to individuals. The next thing is liking. You know, there's no harm in a bit of entertainment in your subject lines. Okay, like the sun. You know, think about ways in which you can put a smile on people's faces through the subject line as well. You know, heighten people's curiosity with what might be behind the subject line. Now, of course, when we're dealing with corporate communications, there's only so many jokes and so many sensationalist headlines we can get away with. One company that you might want to look at, they do this very well, and in fact they actually use artificial intelligence to write subject lines, is a company called Phrasey, and I'm a big fan of their emails. They have a lot of wordplay in them, and indeed they use things like symbols in subject lines as well to you know, increase the attention that they're given in what is typically a crowded inbox. None of us are lacking in emails, so it really is a question of making your one stand out, and there's lots of little tricks like that, a little bit of entertainment, an emoji perhaps to lift your subject line out of a very crowded inbox. The other one, which is more akin to business email marketing, is using social proof, otherwise known as consensus, case studies, testimonials, examples, data, things that you can use to back up your proposition. You know, people tend to either be influenced by stories or stats, and if you've got stats that you can rely on, or indeed you've got stories from customers that you've helped, case studies, etc., name dropping prominent customers who the rest of your audience will recognize and perhaps be interested in, then again, you know, the subject line is a great place to name drop people that you think will be influential to your target audience. Probably the most common one is authority. And authority in the subject line is basically you demonstrating your thought leadership. Okay, have you got content that will help people? And I think this is particularly important at the moment because although from an email marketing perspective, you can take the approach of, my emails are here to sell my products and services. I also think there's an argument to say your emails are actually there to help people buy those products and services, and to help them to buy. If you can be perceived as an authority in your subject matter, if you have the answers to how they adapt their business to the current challenges that they face, then the likelihood is you'll see a better response than those overtly salesy emails which just ask you for business. And I think we have a couple of recruitment companies on the session today. I've been helping a couple of recruitment companies recently, and indeed I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, which you can learn more about this. But I've seen two types of emailing from recruitment companies in the last few weeks. There are those that have just gone, hello, have you got any roles to fill? We can help. And then I've got a different type of recruitment company, a little bit like Michael Page here, who are seeking to add value, running your recruitment processes remotely. So what they're doing is helping to buy rather than selling to people. They're doing that by putting out content which they believe the audience will find useful and helpful and interesting, and they're pitching that from the subject line onwards. The lovely thing about that kind of tactic in email marketing is you don't necessarily need the email to do the whole job in terms of selling a product or a service to someone. If I see people registering for a webinar like this, and I am Michael Page, that says to me these companies are still intending on recruiting, and therefore I can focus my time, my effort, and my attention on those prospects as opposed to those that just pass it by. So think about how you can demonstrate your authority in your industry, in an area, and obviously that authority and that influence at the moment ideally should be related to helping your customers cope with the challenges that they face in their business at the moment. And that's one of the other great things about doing email marketing well at the moment is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You probably need to be communicating with your existing customers. And you'll probably find that your potential customers, the people that you would want to do business with, have exactly the same challenges: digital, practical, and financial disruption. So if you can demonstrate your authority on the subject matter, which helps them in that regard, those sorts of content marketing pieces will be just as helpful for customers as they are for lead gen, for new business, and vice versa. The last principle that I try and use in subject lines is reciprocity, okay, which is a terrible Americanism, I know, but it basically means giving back, okay? Thank you. Thank you as a phrase in a subject line for me tends to equal better response rates. Why? Because if someone's thanking me for something, I want to at least have a quick look at what's that's about. And that thank you subject line might introduce them to any number of other things: an upsell proposition, a cross-sell proposition, a request for a testimonial. It doesn't really matter. But if you do have some engagement with someone, like for instance coming on a webinar, something like this, thank you for attending our webinar. So just thanking people and showing some gratitude within your emails and indeed within the subject line is a great way of getting more engagement through creative use of subject lines. The other thing that I mentioned is to be relevant. Okay, so I've seen a lot of emails from very large businesses in the last few weeks talking about the crisis, talking about how to cope with it and what have you. Because they're big businesses that operate internationally, they are very focused on things in America or somewhere other than where I'm located, which is in the UK. So what happens is, although you're trying to demonstrate empathy, you're trying to be all things to all people, and that doesn't really resonate with everybody. So again, within your subject lines and within the introductions to your emails, one of the other things that you could try and do is have relevant content. And relevant content in email marketing on the basis that you're going to large audiences tends to equal dynamic content. In other words, put things in your subject line and the opening gambit of your email which are specifically relevant to each person within your database. This is an example of that sort of thing at work. Instead of sending the email from the brand name, we send it from the account manager, the person who has the relationship with the customer. The word your, it infers possession. It's something to do with me. Your vehicle make contract. And when we see one of these filled in, your BMW contract, your Audi contract. Hi, Dan, we wanted to let you know that your Audi contract finishes on the 30th of June. So this is a transaction. This is a marketing email disguised as a transactional email. It appears to be something which is hyper-specific and relevant to the individual who we're targeting. in effect, it is actually just a set of generic marketing options in relation to taking out a future vehicle lease. But the way it's presented is to try and encourage the reader from the initial view of the subject line to get to think, oh, this is for me and it's something I should definitely read. The last principle in that subject line, 5 tips, is to test things. Okay, I can give you tips, I can give you hints. There's lots of best practice advice on subject lines online. The reality is it's an incredibly nuanced area, and what will work for your specific audience with the specific subject matter that you have to convey to them is really difficult to predict. So what I would encourage you to do is split test things. You can split test subject lines, you can split test preview text, you can split test times of day, days of the week, etc., etc. But what I would encourage you is, if there are campaigns that are important to you, take time to learn what's working real world before you commit to sending to your whole audience. So, in summary, subject lines, 5 tips to improve. Sell the email. Make sure the purpose of the subject line is to get them to open the email. The email itself then has to do the job of actually selling them the product, the service, or the piece of content that you want them to consume. Be succinct, remember those character limits, be persuasive, use those psychological principles to try and ensure within a very short space, just a few words, you are persuading people to read your email. Be relevant, obviously mention them. One thing I'm not a big fan of is actually putting someone's first name in the subject line itself. It is a way of getting people's attention. It's one of those crude mechanisms that we can use. However, I think it has a limited shelf life. If you did it all week in, week out, it's gonna wear thin. But if there are other things about the customer or indeed the prospect, then by all means get the company name, get something about their industry or something else which is relevant to them within that subject line. And most importantly of all, whatever crazy theories you take from my session today, or indeed from anywhere else, make sure you test things with your specific audience. Test, refine, but please do spend time, being creative with your subject lines. Nothing has an effect on the performance of an email more than the subject line. So, how did we do on time with that? Oh, we did the whole 10 minutes on that. Alex, have we got any other questions on subject lines? Has anyone?
No, I think we've definitely answered the questions regarding subject lines. Obviously, one of them was including, is there a formula to guarantee open rates? I think obviously it's clear from what you're saying, you can't guarantee it, but if you do all the things right and listen to the great advice that Dan's given there, then you're going to have the best chance to get the most out of your email campaigns. Yeah,
guaranteeing the success of an email campaign is something I would love to be able to offer, but extremely difficult to do. What I can guarantee you is if you spend time on it and you're creative, you will see a better result than if you just have something like May newsletter. And it's incredible just how many dull as dishwater subject lines I see coming out of very prominent firms still, both in a business to business and indeed a business to consumer capacity. Fab. Okay, so that was the first major theme that we had from all the questions that we were asked. Alex, what did we have up next?
We have got deliverability next. The fun
deliverability.
Stuff.
Yep, the bane of our support team's life, helping people with deliverability, which, if you're not familiar with that weird and wonderful word, is effectively the technical aspects of making sure an email gets delivered to the inbox. Because when you send an email via eShot or via any email marketing platform, or indeed via Outlook and Gmail and things like that, there is a whole range of technology which is basically set out to thwart you, to stop you getting to where you want, which is people's inboxes. Okay, and I just want to explain, I don't want to geek out too much today, but I just want to explain a couple of very important principles to what is happening when you send an email. Now, the first thing that I noticed from the questions is people are asking for cheat sheets. They're asking for advice on sorry, bear with me, I've got the wrong deck. There we go. We had people asking about cheat sheets, lists of words to avoid putting into emails. And there are still words that you should avoid putting in emails, but it's a bit of an old school technology now. Most spam filtration and email protection is now done based on behavior rather than what was effectively known as keyword density. So it is still a factor, and indeed I have another webinar that I did about a year ago which talks about that in more detail if you do want to know the naughty words. But even if they are naughty words, I wouldn't worry about them per se. What's really going to affect whether your emails go to spam or not nowadays, and especially in a business-to-business capacity, is how people are interacting with your emails. And unfortunately, most of the email providers have made it very, very easy for people to tell the mail providers that your emails are unwanted, that they are spam. So within close proximity to everyone's inbox is a button that says mark this email as junk, mark this email as spam. It manifests itself in lots of different ways. And if lots of people click those buttons, then it can get you into all sorts of trouble. So what happens is each sender has a reputation, and that reputation tends to be based around two key things: the domain and the IP address from which you are sending emails. So you ordinarily, for the most part, you will have what's called a sending domain for sending email marketing, and that is usually distinct from your website domain. And indeed the domain that you send normal emails to your colleagues and to your customers through. And there's a very important reason for that, is if you use the same domain for bulk email marketing as you do for your actual website, if you run into any trouble with that domain, it can be ruinous for your brand. It can literally bring down your organization, where you are, if you get blacklisted, then you will not be able to send emails as an organization. And indeed, you may find that when people try and visit your website, they get warning messages in things like Google Chrome. So that sending domain is usually the key technical piece of making sure that your emails are separated from what you do day to day, but that domain in itself has a reputation. Okay, and if that reputation turns sour because lots of people mark the email as junk or it ends up in spam filters, then that's what gets you into trouble. Now, one person doing that isn't going to get you into trouble. Indeed, even 10 people doing that isn't going to get you into trouble. But behind each of the major spam filtration systems is an algorithm which is programmed to work in a certain way. They never tell us exactly what those thresholds are, but basically what you need to try and ensure is people are doing as much good stuff in your emails as possible and as little bad stuff as possible. Okay, so good behaviors: opening emails, forwarding them, taking them out of the junk folder, saying that this isn't spam. That's good. And sometimes clicks also help, although a lot of spam filters don't actually track those because of privacy concerns. Bad behaviors: not opening emails, unsubscribing, marking them as junk, or the worst, complaining. That's when somebody reports your email and says, I think this person is a spammer. And if you get too many of those, you can be in a lot of trouble very quickly. Now, I want to highlight the first one of those in particular: not opened. Again, somebody not opening your email isn't a big issue on its own, but if it happens in sufficient quantities over a long time, then that's what can get you into trouble. And what we know is if you've got Gmail addresses in your data, because even though it's business to business, a lot of people use personal email addresses to subscribe to things. If a Gmail address is disposable, and in other words, people don't log into it, they don't really use it, but they use it to fill in forms on websites all the time. If someone's not logging into that Gmail account for 2 years, Gmail turn it into a spam trap. So it will actually, after 2 years, become a liability if it's still in your database. So that's where database health, making sure your data is clean, making sure you are only emailing people who are responding in some way, shape or form to emails, is very, very important. And for those of you who are eShot customers on the session today, when you go to your CRM dashboard within eShot, you will see that we have engaged, slipping away and disengaged contact pots. And that is basically eShot automatically categorizing your data. Go and look at your disengaged pot and look who's in it, and you should probably look to do something with the data in that within that section. If you need a hand with that, then I'm sure Alex can help you in particular to refresh that data to get new and up-to-date and accurate contacts to continue promoting your products and services to the businesses that you're targeting. Lastly, on the more conventional business-to-business side of things with that, you should be aware of something called Microsoft SNDS. Microsoft SNDS was born out of Outlook.com or Hotmail, as some of us still refer to it, but the same technology is now applied in their in the kind of business to business, in the kind of Outlook side of things for business emails as well. And what that does is it says if they have a complaint ratio above 0.1% on any given campaign, then you have a danger that not only that campaign, but indeed future campaigns from the same domain may be marked as spam. Okay, so 0.1%, obviously that's really, really low. One person in 1,000 marks your email as spam, then that can lead you into trouble. So again, through eShot, if you're using our deliverability tools, we get that feedback. I mean, Microsoft make this information available to everyone, but it is quite technical. With an eShot, you can actually see that data and see if you are getting complaints from people within the Microsoft network. And obviously that could be from many, many different businesses, but they are looking at that stuff overall. If you see your complaint ratios consistently high over a sustained period, you will find you are in all sorts of trouble. So as I say, although the content of emails is still a factor in deliverability, the most important aspect of making sure deliverability is good nowadays is making sure the people that you're emailing are responding positively to your emails, they are engaging with them, and not, most importantly, marking them as junk and telling Microsoft and Google and the likes that you're a spammer. The other thing, just to top off with this, what we get a lot of the time, I'm a big fan in business to business email marketing of targeting people with plain text emails. We don't need in business to business to go all glossy with pictures and animated stuff and what have you. You know, so it's perfectly acceptable to have conventional lead generation, plain text emails in business to business marketing. You don't have to go to town with your email design unless there's a good reason to. But it is something to bear in mind when you do try and appear to be personal to someone. You know, think back to that dynamic content example I made earlier on. Just by the virtue of making sure we do things by the book, email marketing software will always flag to the recipient that this is a bulk communication. In other words, it's sent to lots of people, not to one person. So that's when you will see messages at the top of the email where the likes of Microsoft and Apple and Google have identified that this is a bulk mailer, and we can't do anything about it. They will then present them with options to unsubscribe, no matter how much you try and hide them down the bottom of the emails. So I hope that's quickly given you an insight into modern up-to-date deliverability. Best thing is database health. It should be your core focus, and this is a good time at the moment to obviously make sure that you have up-to-date and accurate records for the people that you want to communicate with, you know, and obviously in doing so, make sure you keep a clean, healthy, accurate list, and indeed there's lots of help available from both eShot and indeed the Market Scan on that topic if you need it. Okay, so
Fantastic.
Any other bits on deliverability, Alex?
No, I think again you've covered everything. I think just from my side, just to add something which is in line with everything you've already mentioned. I spoke to someone last week who had been sending their mass emails through their Outlook, which is obviously attached to their website domain, and they'd obviously gone over that threshold for number of complaints, and it got to the point that they'd actually locked down the entire company emails for 24 hours. Now I'm sure they can recover from it with some better practices. They're also going to now start looking at using eShot, so they're in conversations with Dan's team over there. But it is vital that you are looking after your data and looking after the domains you're sending from to make sure that you don't cause yourself significant harm. Yeah,
absolutely. It's I think those pitfalls are getting more severe to some extent because there is so much concern about cybersecurity, and that kind of, you know, preventing phishing, preventing fraud spills over into the world of email marketing increasingly, because, you know, being marked as spam is akin to being a fraudster in the eyes of some of the spam filters. So you really do need to be careful of that. And as Alex says, you know, if you can't communicate as a business at all for 24 hours, that's going to have a huge impact at the moment. And yes, you know, certainly, you know, when you get a temporary block like that, normally you can say to Microsoft, hey, look, this is unfair, can you remove it? And they will, but then if it keeps happening, then you'll end up on a more permanent blacklist.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I think we should have covered all of the deliverability by the looks of things. The next question we have on the the list. There's a short answer and a long answer too, but it's, can we put video into eShots?
Yes, you can put videos in emails, but no, you shouldn't. The reason for that is support for the email format is still very sketchy. So although you can put it inside the email, the person receiving it, there's a fair chance that their email application won't play it. Again, it's a security issue for a lot of business-to-business email clients. So normally what I would recommend, if you want a video in an email, just take a static visual from the video, put a play button on it, and just stick it in your email as a clickable link. And then what you will find is, obviously, when people click on that link, they will be taken to their browser, to YouTube, to Vimeo, to your website to actually consume the video. But yeah, ordinarily we wouldn't recommend actually embedding videos in emails themselves, although it is technically possible.
In the chats, we've just got, what about GIFs? Which obviously looks slightly different, but I'll let you go geeky on that as well, Dan.
Yep. So again, from a business-to-business perspective, GIFs was always one of those annoying things which business to consumer email marketing seemed to rely on quite heavily. The good news is Microsoft have relaxed their approach on that. So most of the more up-to-date versions of Outlook will support animated GIFs. By all means, use them. Phrasey, who I mentioned earlier on, who are very clever in the subject lines, they also use animated GIFs in their newsletters an awful lot. The thing is, if there is any technical issue with an animated GIF in an email, it's fine. It will just show the first frame. It won't play, but it is still visible within an email. It'll just be a static GIF as opposed to an animated GIF.
Excellent. Well, I was very pleased with that news by the look of the chat.
Cool.
Right. So the next question, which I think is actually quite, although it's only been asked once, I suspect there's other people that might actually have this on the tip of their tongue as well. So bear with me as I try to read it without my glasses on. Given that there is to be so much email noise out at present, with many organisations responding to the COVID-19 situation by flooding our email inboxes with unprecedented times type emails, we say that a lot, don't we? Is there a huge danger that we would annoy existing customers and run the risk of being unsubscribed, blocked, etc., if we continue with our own regular campaigns?
Yeah, I think when I did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, I made reference to a video that I'd seen on one of the marketing press bulletins, where they kind of stitched together the various TV adverts that are running at the moment, and it was kind of identikit, in terms of everyone demonstrating empathy, soft music, and there's this kind of collective, oh, can we help? We're here to help. And I think, there is a danger at the moment. I mean, there's a danger all the time that your marketing gets seen by your audience as being vanilla, effectively not offering anything any different from anyone else. And if you do fall into the trap of being perceived as noise, then yes, obviously that will lead to more unsubscribes and lead to, disengagement. The trick is a little bit like what we were talking about earlier on with the subject line stuff, is to be relevant to the audience. If you've got value that you can demonstrate to people through emails, you shouldn't be afraid to email them very frequently. And indeed, what you will find certainly with newsletters and brands who are engaging an audience very regularly is they will send emails often daily or even several times a day, because they know their audience are wanting specific things from them. If it is a case of just sending out messages for the sake of it, and it's all a little bit, we want to be seen to be saying something, even though we haven't got anything particularly valuable to say, then yeah, I'd probably at this juncture perhaps cool that down a little bit, because yeah, certainly from what I've seen, there's a lot of brands who have had to put conventional campaigns on hold. They don't really know what to say at the moment, therefore they're not really saying anything. And I think, if you haven't got anything to say, don't send anything at all via email, same as any other channel. But if you have got good stuff, if you can help your customers, if you can help your prospects, and indeed you can help them with things which are specific, relevant, and important right now, then email more. Because actually what you'll find at the moment is there will be a lot of businesses who have stopped emailing, and they've stopped their marketing, because marketing budgets tend to be the first things to get absolutely slashed. So in such a disruptive time, there's actually an opportunity to win more business where others are perhaps radio silent, but you do have to make sure you are demonstrating value.
Okay, perfect. Another great answer. Thank you, Dan. Right, before we move on to the next subject area, we've had another question online, which was, well, it's a two-part question. How do you stop the mailing list message that you showed? Is it better to send in smaller batches? So obviously this is relating back to your deliverability slides, I think.
So the long and short of it is you can't and you shouldn't. If you rewind 2 or 3 years in consumer email marketing, everybody was asking, how do I stop going into the promotions tab in Gmail and get to the inbox instead? And the long and short of it is Microsoft and Google are too clever for you to cheat that. It's not whether you send to one person or send to 1,000 people. It's the fact that you're sending a bulk email. Okay, so when the same email goes to lots of people at the same time, and lots can be 10 people or 10,000 or even 10 million, then it has to carry the bulk email flag in the header, which is a technical aspect of the email. And when the mail system sees that it has that bulk flag against it, it's going to put that unsubscribe thing at the top. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be afraid of unsubscribes if your content is good enough. So again, back to that relevancy and value piece, as long as what you're sending is interesting and relevant to people, they shouldn't want to subscribe. But if they do want to subscribe because their stuff unsubscribe because your content isn't relevant to them, although it's annoying that that button shows at the top, don't be afraid of it.
Well, okay, and then a follow on from that, Dan, we have, what is the percentage of change to each email that would conceal the bulk sending?
So again, it's not to do with the volume of email you're sending, it's to do with the method. So if you don't want an email to be a bulk email, then yes, you could send it through Outlook or Gmail or something like that. But obviously, as Alex mentioned before, you then run the risk of being treated as a spammer because you are not putting the processes in place to handle bulk email properly. So what happens when someone complains about your emails? I say one person complaining about your email is not a big deal as long as those bulk processes are put in place. So in eShop, for example, when someone complains about an email, what will happen is that will come back to our postmaster address and we will automatically suppress that contact from future sends. We will digitally acknowledge that that telling off from Microsoft or whoever it might be. So we handle it automatically. Whereas if you just sent your emails through Outlook ordinarily, although they wouldn't be bulk emails, if people did complain, if they did look for the unsubscribe and couldn't find it, then you run the risk of obviously getting you into more trouble. So I think to some extent, if you want to be a good email marketer in this day and age, you do have to conform to what the technology dictates. You do have to accept that if you want to find your way legitimately into people's inboxes, if you want people to engage with your communications, you have to play by the rules, and that means basically, doing what Microsoft, Google, Apple, and the likes tell you to do.
Right, that question was from Adele. Just come back with a second question on top, which I think's again got some good points that people should be doing to be good with email marketing. But is there an amount of personalization that would stop that?
No. So again, it's all it's to do with is the header of the email itself has a bulk flag in it. So it doesn't matter how much personalization, doesn't matter how many people you're sending the email to, it's the fact that the email is a bulk email. So there are different technical types of email, and all email marketing is effectively bulk, even if it's triggered. So even if it is, sort of automations whereby individual comms are being sent out, all the email is effectively bulk. You can't get around it, and indeed you shouldn't. And let's say in business to consumer marketing, people tried to for several years with Gmail, and they fought a losing battle. And indeed, Gmail was more punitive to those that tried to cheat the system than those that just conformed. And you have a similar situation now with Microsoft. You do have to respect things like Microsoft SNDS. You do have to accept that if some people do not want to receive your emails and they want to opt out, then you need to make that easy for them. And it's much better for them to frankly unsubscribe and just go than to get to the point where they complain and they try and make trouble for you.
That aside, though, Adele, I wouldn't steer away from making sure that your personalization is as strong as possible. Going back to what Dan talked about in the earlier slide decks, it's going to be very important to make sure you're going to get that engagement and get the results that you're going to want from your email marketing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the personalization is more to convince the human that this is a good email as opposed to the technology. You don't have to have tons of personalization. It's just, what is it that you can put in that subject line or the preview space that will make someone go, oh, this is for me. This is something specific to me. Sometimes that can just be as simple as their first name. Hi, Dan. But if you can be more sophisticated, then great.
And then we have another question, which is, what is the difference between using platforms like eShot, MailChimp, and alike, and an in-house system?
So I presume when you say in-house, you mean sending through Outlook or Gmail. Is that right?
I'll have to wait for the answer to that question. Yes, it is right.
Yeah. So as I say, the idea behind a system like Outlook and indeed Gmail is it's been designed for people to exchange one-to-one emails with each other. So the whole point behind communication through Outlook and Gmail is that you are sending an email to a colleague, to a customer, to a friend. That's the fundamental principle on which it is built. It will allow you to send larger amounts of email. I think the limit in Outlook is 500. The idea behind that is it's to cover off things like the kind of the global address lists kind of use cases. It is not designed to be able to do bulk email marketing. Bulk email marketing, I think, is actually specifically precluded in the terms and conditions of using things like Office 365. It's in the terms and conditions that you sign that you will not effectively use your Outlook for that sort of thing. So the system's not been designed to do that sort of thing. That's where you need a tool like eShot or MailChimp if you have to do things by the book on a bulk basis. And obviously, there are huge other benefits beyond the kind of the technical aspects of that, in terms of the insight that you get, the fact that you're able to track opens, track unsubscribes, track clicks through to your website, and a whole range of other things that will help you to be a better email marketer by using a bulk email tool as opposed to sending through Outlook or Gmail.
Perfect. And the same, it's a question posed by the same attendee, which I'm sure you could talk for hours on this one, Dan, but where MailChimp might cost next to nothing versus more expensive provider, why use the more expensive? Do we have time for this type of question, or are we going to be here for a couple of hours, Dan?
Yeah, I suppose, price is a component of value. And MailChimp is a good system. I've used it myself, although I work for effective email marketing software now. I worked in a digital agency for over a decade, and I was a MailChimp customer for several years, and it's a very good system, except when you get into trouble. So, something like the complaints that we just talked about, if you did it, firstly, again, MailChimp don't let you send to unsolicited communications. It is designed really for business to consumer email marketing, and it's designed for people who have opted in through a website and are part of an e-commerce marketing list. They have a very, very stringent view on spam, and if you get complaints against MailChimp, what you tend to find is your account will just be suspended, and you have no recourse. So yeah, I suppose the difference between a tool like MailChimp, it's very good if you want to do consumer email marketing. It's very good if you are dealing with a fully opted-in list. In my experience, despite things like the GDPR, very, very few business-to-business email marketers in the UK today are dealing with a fully opted-in list. If you've got it, great. It's a huge asset to you and well done. But the majority of us, realistically, it's not practical. So whereas somebody like MailChimp will obviously shut you down, somebody like us will help you. We might have to tell you off every now and then, but ultimately, we're going to help you to get things right. And in the more general sense, beyond the problems, that's the difference between something where you've got the added value of the expertise of the likes of me and my team versus just the software as it comes without the service on top.
Right,
sorry, that was in danger of turning into a sales pitch, wasn't it? Sorry.
Well, the next question could lead you to that as well, Dan. Don't worry too much. Right, so most of our e-shots are image with text within the image. Does this damage our chances of getting through versus a more heavy, a more text-heavy email? How do I improve this?
So yeah, again, from a business to business perspective, very image heavy emails. What I would say is go and look at it in Outlook before you enable the blocked images to be shown. What you tend to find is emails that rely very heavily on images don't work well in Outlook because, effectively Microsoft, again, for security reasons, are blocking the images by default. The other thing is, again, this is kind of more old school spam filtration, but if your if your image to text ratio is above 60%, in other words, more than 60% of your email is images, then that can trigger some of the old school spam filtration because it doesn't like your email because it can't read it. The spam filter can read text easily. What it can't do is read images because, there might be things which are dangerous concealed within the images. The machine can't actually see the image.
Great, fantastic. So that's all the questions on that part for the time being. So we're going to move to the next area where we've had a number of questions in regards to email marketing to small audiences or how to grow your audience.
Yeah.
And I think this will be a tag team for me and Dan to cover, because there's various different ways that you can achieve what you want to achieve, potentially on the small audience, but also in regards to growing your audience as well. So Dan, do you want to start off with the more fun stuff?
Yeah, I mean, an audience being small is not a problem if it's a good targeted audience. So, a lot of the time I speak to businesses who, if they're very strict with themselves, there's only so many companies that they could sell to. If you're in a particular niche, or you have a product or a service which has an identified customer audience, you don't necessarily need hundreds of thousands of contacts to be able to reach the people that you want. So a small audience isn't a problem as long as it's a targeted audience. On the assumption that you have got a targeted audience, there's various different ways which you can grow it. The best ways to grow it tend to be organic ways, through things like social media, through pay-per-click campaigns, through trade shows, which obviously aren't really going to be a thing, I think, for some time now, where you can organically grow your list. But they take time. And when I say time, I mean years. Most of the time, people need to do things quicker and easier than that, which is where obviously licensing data, building a list based on profiling your existing customers, profiling your targets, making sure that you are targeting the right industries, the right job titles, the right geographical locations, I would tend to say is the best way to ensure that you grow your list without just throwing a whole load of email addresses into it, which aren't necessarily the ones that you want.
Again, with the growing of the list, in line with what Dan was saying about purchasing of data, you've also got to make sure that you can handle whatever results are going to come off the back of it. So if you've taken on board all the really great advice Dan's given you, and your email campaigns improve because of it, how much data do you actually want that you can cope with those responses as an organization? So that's going to be quite important, because the last thing you want to do is the first thing that you portray yourself as is poor customer service, because you've gone and bought 50,000 records, but actually, realistically 5 or 10,000 would have been more than enough with what your internal resources like. So I take that as part of what you should be focused on alongside anything else.
The other aspect to that is, when it's business to business, you should look at the businesses you're targeting as much as the individuals. So if you've had inquiries from people in the marketing department, for example, who are the other stakeholders within that organization who are likely to be involved in a decision to purchase your product or service? I would say at the moment, finance contacts are going to be really, really important. Making sure if you want to influence a business to consume your products and services, you need to be finding other people within the organization beyond, the person who you might already have direct contact with, who you can influence. I read something a while ago. I don't know if it's changed because of the current situation, but your average business to business purchase now in an enterprise will have 17 different stakeholders involved in the decision making process. Lots of departments, procurement, security, IT, finance, plus the disciplines which are more relevant specifically to whatever it is you're selling. So, certainly if you know the companies that you're after, if you know your target audience well enough, then make sure your database, what you're doing with your database, is building it in a way where you get the relevant stakeholders into your audience, and then you are influencing them through your emails.
Fantastic. Right, we have another question. Are you able to implement any kind of marketing automation? If you're able to follow up with an automated survey, thanking them for reading the email and ask if they viewed the email, but might need further assistance.
Yeah, I mean, marketing automation used in tandem with email marketing really is the fundamentals of a good digital marketing program now. And you'll find, almost all your digital touch points, email should be involved in an automated capacity in some perspective. So if someone signs up to your newsletter via your website, there should be some sort of automated acknowledgement of that. If someone registers for a webinar, there should be an automated acknowledgement of that. For example, I'm not going to personally email each one of you individually after this, but you will receive an email from me after this webinar. But that is the automation, knowing who attended, who didn't attend, and then sending them relevant communications post-event. So, where I tend to start with automation is keep things simple. What a lot of people do is they rush into automation, try and automate complicated customer journeys, and they can end up getting themselves in a bit of a pickle, especially if you're not experienced in it. Start with contained processes, things that are repeatable within your organization. So if someone gets a quote, is there a nurture series to keep them engaged while they are considering that quote? Your sales team might send a quote out to someone today, having a nurture series to send out the person who's had the quote 3 or 4 emails over the next 7 to 10 days. Those are the sorts of automations that tend to be really useful, because guess what? Again, all that tracking insight, you asked, whether you ask them whether they received it. You don't need to ask them, you'll know, because you'll have the tracking data from that, and then you'll be able to automatically adjust your email behavior accordingly. Automation is a huge topic which is difficult to cover in a couple of questions on something like this today. I have for quite some years now been running marketing automation workshops, which are very hands-on, very kind of engaged sessions. I just need to work out how I do it digitally rather than in a meeting room. But yeah, we probably need to work that one out.
And Zara's also asked if you've got any blog posts or any other information, which I know obviously you do, and potentially something you might want to catch up with after.
Yeah, I mean, on our website, you will find a wealth of information about automation, both in terms of how to plan it and indeed how to implement it, and some of the considerations with that. And yeah, obviously, if there's any specific questions, then happy to go into more detail with anyone after the show today as well.
Fantastic. Right. So that's, I think, covers off all the questions on the small audiences. So just as a summary, just because you've got a small audience, it doesn't mean that you can't work it and get the results that you want. But there are plenty of different ways that you can grow your audience. And then there's some questions that were almost tipping over from the audience arena to the next area where we're talking about cold emails. So we've got a couple of questions on that, but if we answer these, I think that it's going to cover off everything else that's already been asked in a small audience. So the first one is, we want to build and nurture long-term relationships so we are top of mind at the right time. We use a free offer to generate over 100 leads on LinkedIn. How do we build engagement through email?
Yeah, so that is probably the perfect example of a situation where marketing automation could actually help, what we were talking about just now. So yeah, when you look at good integrated digital campaigns, LinkedIn's a fantastic way of generating new leads, but it's very expensive to continue using social tools like LinkedIn to keep in touch with those leads. So if you are able to get people to register for something like a webinar like this, like a white paper, or in your case, the free offer that you mentioned, then what I would be inclined to suggest is what you should then have is a nurture sequence to keep in touch with those prospects. Now, how long those sequences last really depends on your customer journey. If the typical time range between someone first inquiring and buying your products and services a couple of weeks, then great, you can probably get away with 3 or 4 emails. If it's a 6-month buying cycle, if you are dealing in kind of enterprise clients, and it will be months or perhaps even years before a new lead turns into a viable opportunity, then obviously you need to think more long term. And that's where having content marketing assets, white papers, webinar recordings, just blog posts, quite frankly, that will help people on their journey to consuming your product and service. That's the sort of thing I would have to support something like a LinkedIn offer. Make sure you are sending emails and follow up to those people, engaging them. And the lovely thing about that is, yes, obviously you'll hang that sort of content out there. They may engage, they may not, but obviously we have the tracking technology now to spot buying behavior within those sequences. So for example, someone signs up for your offer today and you start sending them, nurture emails for 3 or 4 months, but you hear nothing else from them. Your sales team have tried to contact them 3 or 4 times, not got anything from that. And then all of a sudden, not only do they read one of those emails, but then you see them clicking through to your website, looking around, looking at things like pricing information and what have you. And that's the sort of thing where you can then say to a sales team, red alert, this is now a prospect that you can go and qualify more comprehensively. So a lot of the time, email marketing done well, again, helps people to buy. It just sets out your stall, and then obviously when you notice buying behavior, you can react accordingly.
Fantastic. Okay, so conscious that we are very quickly running out of time.
Okay, well, let's make sure we cover the questions that have already been asked, and I'm happy to stick around if people want to ask more.
So we have what advice would you give to a startup in this period regarding email marketing?
Yes. Okay. So I think the lovely, obviously not a great time to be a startup from a financial perspective, but probably actually not a bad time to be a startup from a disrupting perspective. 3 or 4 months ago, there would probably be a number of things in most businesses where the status quo would have been fine. As much as you may have had a better proposition, you may have been able to do it better, faster, cheaper, more intelligently than your competitor, there was no impetus within the businesses that you're targeting to change things. And the good news is now there is, because guess what? Everyone is having to change. There's that old marketing cliche, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. IBM computers were always seen as the safe thing, which IT managers that didn't want to stick their neck out would purchase. And you tend to find that with a lot of large businesses. Large businesses, they have all these customers, and because they're a brand and everyone knows them and everyone trusts them, it's very, very difficult to pull business away from them. Except now, when actually they're being pushed to reduce their prices significantly, when their service offering is being questioned, when they're not customer centric and they haven't actually been able to respond in a timely manner to important questions from their customers in some time. So I think in as much as obviously it's a challenging time to be a new business, it's actually a time of great opportunity, because conventional business to business relationships will suffer at the moment. There's no two ways about it. Even if you are you've got customers who have been very loyal to you, you're probably going to find their finance teams are tapping them on their shoulders and saying, you've got to go and cut cost out of the business. You've got to go and find ways to do this faster, better, cheaper. And if as a startup you're agile enough and lean enough to be able to deliver that, perhaps at a different price point, and price is a component of value, so it's not all about price, but if you're able to offer a more adaptable service personalized to their needs at the moment, then I think this is a tremendous opportunity. But obviously you've got to find them in the first place, and then, like we talked about, you've got to nurture them as well.
Okay, so we have one more question from the questions that have been asked. And then we've got a question online. So I think we should just about have time to cover everything off. So this final one is, interested to hear the return rate that is expected from various marketing efforts. Okay. So very much an ROI question, Dan.
The reason I'm a big fan of email, and I always have been, is it's not a cost per lead model. So, most of the other avenues that are available to you nowadays in terms of pay per click and social and various other things, you have to pay quite significant amounts to generate leads. Email remains a very cheap way of doing it. Yes, you need the software, and there's an investment in that itself, but once you've got the software, you can send lots of emails, and obviously it is still time and again a reliable way to reach business to business contacts. Yes, there's an argument in business to consumer. Maybe you should be focusing your investment on Facebook instead. Maybe we should be finding out how we could advertise through TikTok or Instagram or whatever else. But in business to business, email time and again is the platform where you will find your customers. Your customers are using email right now. They're probably using email right now more than they have done in recent years because there's less distractions. They're certainly not going to trade shows. They're probably not going to so many meetings. And indeed, just in terms of day-to-day activity, they're probably sat at their desks at their homes, and therefore their propensity to consume more email is probably higher. So as a channel, I'm a big fan of email because, in a business-to-business capacity, it is consistent. It delivers consistently. Obviously, it can be a crowded place. You are fighting with others for attention within the inbox, and that's not just limited to your conventional competitors. There are lots of people vying for the attention of your contacts within the inbox. But as a cost-effective way, sorry, there goes the cuckoo clock again, as a cost-effective way of reaching an audience, email is, for me, fantastic. I don't have any specific stats on business-to-business email marketing, but Litmus, who are a very well-respected email marketing technical brand, they provide a lot of insights on the way that email works. Their most recent big survey, they do a big survey review. I think they calculated from a very large range of marketers that email marketing was delivering an ROI of 42 times on average what was invested in it. So for every pound you had to spend on email marketing, you'd get 42 pounds back. And that outperformed every other digital channel by a country mile. Not that I'm biased.
Let's not forget about the other thing that email does for you. It's driving traffic to your websites. And then if you're driving traffic to your website, then you can use some of the other channels out there to then start to retarget, as well as using your email for retargeting with things like in leads that eShot has got, for instance, doing some tracking on your website, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or anything you can think about. You can start to pull everything together. But email is definitely probably going to be the most cost-effective way of getting a return on investment, and definitely the most cost-effective way of getting traffic to your website.
Absolutely.
Right, we have one more question.
One more question.
If we've still got
we haven't unmuted anybody, Al.
We haven't. The questions keep coming in,
Fair enough. Okay.
So we have generated leads through offering white papers and run webinars. However, many of them have ticked the "Do Not Contact" button. Can we do anything to capitalize on these leads?
If you've asked the question, then theoretically, no. If someone has removed consent for you to communicate with them, then you have to respect that. So, certainly, I have to be careful here. I can't give legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, but data protection legislation in the UK is stringent nowadays. There are two principal pieces of legislation which define what we can do as email marketers. That is the Data Protection Act 2018, which was effectively the UK law that enshrined the GDPR within the UK law. And there is also the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations 2003. Those two pieces of legislation are a bit contradictory in relation to email marketing, and indeed, in January, the Information Commissioner published some draft guidance, which we're still waiting to see what happens next, about email marketing, and they did cover business to business in particular and give the lawful bases on which you could continue to communicate with people. But if you've already asked the question whether they want to hear from you and they've said no, consent trumps everything else. So although you can use legitimate interest to communicate with people entirely legally, if they have removed their consent, then you have to respect that over and above your right to use legitimate interest as a way to communicate with people. What I would ask is what has led you to ask people if they want to opt into other things above and beyond. Is is that necessary? You know, was it your lawyer who said, you know, you must include the option when they register for the webinar that you must also give them the opportunity to opt in or out of other communications as well? Certainly I would be inclined, if you're able to do it, and you would have to follow your lawyer's advice, and, you know, not to say that every lawyer is going to tell you the same thing, but if you can get away with basically saying to people, well, if you sign up for this webinar, we'd also like to keep in touch with you, then and they say yes to that, then great, because what you've then got is you've got someone to opt in. Okay, now if someone then opts out, you know, every email should carry an unsubscribe. You should always make it easy for people to say, no, I don't want to hear from you again. But, you know, if usually the primary purpose of things like white papers and webinars is to build leads, is to generate, you know, interest, and obviously to be able to follow up with the people that attend those sorts of things. So it sounds to me like you're shooting yourself a little bit in the foot if you're making it, if people are opting out at that early stage.
Fantastic. So obviously we are a little bit over time. However, are there any questions? Does everyone want to put their head above the parapet and ask it live?
Does anyone actually want to talk to us? We don't have to. You don't have to turn your camera on. Don't worry.
It's like your two meetings, Dan.
I put a shirt on for this today, just a shirt. Yeah. Or indeed, you can ask any further questions through the chat if you're feeling a little shy. Are we all good?
Looks like we're all good.
Fab. Okay. Well, I really hope today's been helpful. We would really appreciate your feedback on the session, because Alex and I were umming and ahhing whether to make this a regular thing and pick off some different topics, you know, every couple of weeks or so. You know, certainly I have been used to running live events and doing live workshops an awful lot, so there's some big gaps in my diary now where I've had to bin those off. So doing more online sessions like this is certainly something which we are pontificating over whether we should do, but obviously it'd be great to get your thoughts and feedback on whether you'd like to learn more. You know, email marketing, you know, is a hugely rich topic in itself. We've also touched on marketing automation as well today, so there's lots we could cover on that as well. But obviously, yeah, really keen to hear from you guys as to what else you'd like us to cover on future sessions. But I'm really grateful for joining us today. I hope it's been helpful and interesting. As I say, we will send you some follow-up materials unless you've opted out. You know, hope to catch you on another webinar soon.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Alex, did you want to? Anything you want to?
Well, yeah. Well, I think obviously we covered a lot more on the email marketing front than we did on the data front. So other topics can be more data focused, because it's all well and good having the best marketing setup in the world, but if your data is not up to scratch, then it's not going to perform. Likewise, you can have the best data, but if you haven't got the best delivery, again, equally, you're going to have an issue. So on other sessions, if there are topics that people are interested in, let us know that as part of your fact. Things like data cleansing are going to be quite an important thing, especially in the current situation. And we're doing a lot from our perspective just to assist our client base with the cleansing of data before any other activity comes into play, which feeds very much into getting those results from your email marketing.
Yeah,
so
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so I was just going to reiterate that, yeah, that's we can have another session that is more focused on getting that good data into those email campaigns.
Yeah, I think it's fairly safe to say, however you have put your database together so far, it's gonna see some degradation in the next few months. And yeah, that's obviously, there is a magic formula for every client, and I don't know where that is in terms of how much data you need to be able to sustain the kind of lead generation volumes that you need. Certainly working with a reputable provider like MarketScan, who can ensure that the data is licensed to you properly and on a targeted basis, I'm a big advocate of, because it prevents me from having problems where I then have to talk to clients about obviously sending to lists where they get themselves in trouble. And I say, you know, you do have to be incredibly careful now. If you get into trouble with the likes of Google and Microsoft, getting out of trouble is becoming increasingly difficult. So yeah, I would echo Alex's thoughts on making sure your data is as accurate and indeed as targeted as it could be. Fab. Okay. Well, it looks like most of you have stuck with us way past the 4 o'clock mark. So I'm really grateful for you for sticking with us. I hope everyone's safe and well, and we'll hopefully catch you on another session really soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.